thank you very much for your presentation. So I have one quibble, and that is on the chart, which I actually have, every time it comes up, I take exception to, which is the crowd out.
Yeah.
Because Medicaid is the only insurer that pays for not just acute care services, but long-term services and supports.
Mhm.
And $5 billion of the $16 billion Massachusetts Mass Health Program pays for what I would call social determinants of health. Group adult foster care, personal care attendant services, home health, day hab services are all paid for out of Medicaid, and that I would say actually changes this. So, and again, it doesn't change the conversation, but it does change. I actually think if you were to pull out the long term, I was looking at the heat map on some of the states that are in the lower quadtile there. Actually, if you look at the long-term services support, they actually are, so what I call social determinants of spending. But having said that, so I just, because every time people start comparing Medicaid with Medicare and other things, I sort of sit there, yes, but Medicaid pays for other things that healthcare doesn't pay for. I'd love you to talk a little bit more about the hub and spoke, if you will, because as I'm sure you know, I assume you know, since you put Massachusetts as one of the potential innovative states, is the question of how do you bridge vertically organized institutions and community-based programs that are much more horizontal around addressing the holistic health needs of patients. And one thing is the Massachusetts waiver, I feel like I'm giving birth to a $1.8 billion baby any moment, is, I know, is in fact trying to take the district dollars and not have them solely go through the accountable care organizations, but to allow for different, I don't want to use the word experiments, but different investments to try to bring them together.
Yeah.
So I would welcome your thoughts on that.
Sure. So in relation to this question about Medicaid ACOs in Massachusetts in particular, I think there have been two hub and spoke concepts kind of floating around. One is the Medicaid ACO as a hub and spoke, of course. So you'll have whoever your pilot ACOs are first at the hub, and they're gonna, let me step back. There are two versions of even a hub and spoke model with healthcare at the center. There's one in which the healthcare organizational boundary is just around the hub, and then it contracts with community-based organizations and behavioral health providers who are their own firms, and so you're contracting inter-firm. That kind of preserves some flexibility and autonomy on the part of the community-based organization. So that's one that I kind of showed and is more common. The other one is thought experiment. If someone like I won't name names. If a large health system decides that they want to build all of these things in-house because they've either had poor experiences with other vendors in the past, or they believe they are a brand kind of predicated on excellence and no one will be able to deliver services with the accountability that they want, then you start to think about a hub and spoke model where you've got kind of medical care and then housing, nutrition, behavioral health, home health, all as spokes, but it's all within a large organizational boundary and they kind of become like the Walmart of healthcare. And so those are two different visions of the future that I think we can and should potentially be clear on. I think you're going to have variation even within Boston on how that goes, with maybe a BMC who has longstanding relationships with the community saying there's no way we could start to build these things in-house because it would be terrible for our reputation. It would be seen as competitive with partners we've had for a long time. Other institutions may not feel that way, and in fact may feel very earnestly that they are doing what's in the interest of the patient by building these things in-house because they have such kind of managerial expertise. People in the community generally tend to disagree and say the learning curve for coming up to speed on how to provide nutrition or how to provide housing is just too steep. You'll never get there in time. But I think that's the debate that's kind of going on right now. The other hub that's being talked about is, I don't know, I imagine you saw this as a social service hub of sorts. And so this is another interesting idea that goes straight to the challenge of contracting. Some people have said it's totally unrealistic to ask Medicaid ACOs or any ACOs to individually go out and contract with a whole bunch of social services. Could we not create some kind of infrastructure at the state level that said, like, this is a warehouse of social services? You go to one place as a healthcare organization and say, I want a contract for 25,000 visits to a food pantry and 15 beds in a homeless shelter, these things, here's my list. And then kind of someone who is a front for the whole social service industry or community-based organization industry then goes and builds the contracts and kind of just delivers the contracts to the healthcare organization. I know that was floated in public comment. I haven't heard anything else, but I think it's an interesting idea to hear people talk about that because it's empathetic to the point of view that contracting is more difficult than we maybe think, and even just learning the landscape of available community-based organizations and resources is a lot to ask. I want them to do it, but I'm always careful to be empathetic to the fact that it is a large ask.
Lauren, rarely have I heard a presentation that has had more of an impact, at least on my thinking. You were so generous back in Princeton in last May, and I'm here to apologize that I've been stealing your slides ever since. Say is, if you tell me the charity of your choice, I will make a contribution. So the one area that I'm really having a hard time though, and I mean, I would like you to think more about it because I've never seen anybody think so clearly as the way you think. I'm having a hard time with the ratio. I just don't know what, and you laid it out perfectly here. I'm really having a hard time. So you take a state like Massachusetts, which is at the top of the list when it comes to spending. Maybe some of us believe maybe we spend a little too much, and we could reallocate it a little differently. But for us to be penalized in a way to a state that's spending very little on healthcare and actually looks better on the ratio, we spend $1,000 on healthcare and $800 on social services. They spend $1 and $1.25. I mean, I think I'm not. This is your area, and you've been so insightful as I listen. Think harder about that ratio, and maybe it needs to be modified in a way. I'm not saying it doesn't lead to some good things that you laid out, but thank you so much. I think you and your team are changing the thought process going on more than anybody else I've heard about. So thank you.
If I could just respond briefly to the ratio issue, I think it has issues too. It is by no means a perfect measure, and I feel so strongly about that actually at one point we were contacted by RWJ who was excited, and someone generously was like, I want to try and think about putting the ratio into the county health rankings. And that was the point at which we said, I just don't know if that's that useful. It's a proxy measure. I think, frankly, it's going to have been a flash in the pan. I don't think that this is a measure we're going to be tracking for 10, 20 years, in part because, as the secretary said, we're shoving more and more social determinants of health work into healthcare now. So even in 5 years, I'm not sure it would be comparing apples to apples to then say, well, the ratio in 2020 is this, and in 2015 is this. It would be measuring different things. So I take that feedback really seriously, and I would just say, I try to be as humble as anyone about the fact that it has limited use. It's a proxy, it's a signal about something in terms of how we allocate our attention, even more so than our investment or our resources. But after that, we need to take this conversation someplace else.
Lauren, I spent a lot of my career working with states, trying to teach them how to use Medicaid to pay for social services. So as I look at the sort of ratios, I'm wondering to what extent, picking up on Mary Lou's point, to what extent that's been taken into consideration in looking at the difference between health and social service expenditures.
Yeah, not in any particularly systematic way. I would be interested, Bill, perhaps we can talk later about how much spending on Medicaid you think really gets to social services. My sense is it's always been a fight for people like you to kind of do wraparound things that are of a medical nature, but in a social setting. So we talked about it and we didn't go over the top trying to build in controls. It was a huge data lift to begin with, just to try and, you can imagine, figure out how is hospice considered health or social in Texas versus Connecticut versus, so we were limited in what we could do, but again, I take the critique seriously. Dr. Cutler?
First, I'm going to start off by noting that, in fact, when Lauren was 5 years old, she was admitted to the PhD program that I now administer, which technically means I deserve some credit for that. But also the right to ask for revisions to her PhD dissertation.
Bring it on.
So I would like to ask for an extension to chapter 17. And that would be a one-page chart showing for each of the three areas you mentioned, housing, homelessness, WIC, and food programs and case management. What is Massachusetts doing and what are the best states doing? Or the best, they don't have to be states, but best regions of states. So how far are we behind the curve, and what recommendations would you offer the Commonwealth in terms of, oh, okay, we should be doing this. We're doing actually really well here, but here are a few areas we could do improvements, or we're actually quite behind the curve here. I think that would be a very important thing for us to be able to have, for the Commonwealth to be able to have.
One thing that's top of mind that is not specifically around these three areas, but is around data infrastructure. There are other states who have a unified back end. So someone who has a Medicaid number in the system has the same number when they're collecting SNAP or TANF or a range of other social services. And I think that would be enormously helpful from a research perspective to be able to see how these two sectors and types of spending interact at the individual level. Washington has a really robust infrastructure, and I know that it's always a political battle because people are concerned about the surveillance aspects, potentially for good reason, because I think some of the predictive analytics they can do now are just frankly astounding. You know, if someone has been on food stamps for a long time and then they don't pick up food stamps or retrieve their food stamps for 3-4 weeks on end, they can predict with something like 80% certainty that you're either in jail, dead, or in a hospital, you know. So there's a lot you can do, and again, politically loaded. I wouldn't pretend to understand what the process is to get there, but I think that's a dream to hold out for the future, especially as someone in a doctoral program looking for research opportunities. That would be treasure trove.
I'd be happy to have you add that to your list of things that we should do.
Dissertation committee today.
Dr. Allen?
Madam Secretary, would you like to join the committee?
Lauren, thank you for that presentation, which was absolutely sensational. And I have about a million questions. I'll try to restrict myself, but I'll just ask two that are kind of interrelated. One is, as you just mentioned, we know that adverse childhood experiences end up causing adult diseases. So much of what we're paying for in healthcare now is the result of what happened to children decades ago or years ago. And so one question is there a particular, if you could invest in a certain age bracket, is there anybody you would prioritize? And my second part is about housing, which I also agree is probably the most important thing. And I wondered if you could comment on racial disparities around everything, but especially around housing, because I think it's a particular problem in that area.
So this is great. They're tough questions. Where would I place my emphasis in terms of populations to invest in? You know, I think this gets to the heart of how do we interpret the problem of social determinants of health? Do we think that it is and or should be framed as an everyman problem, meaning we all have social determinants of health. We all probably rely on medical care inappropriately in some instances to fix or attend to problems that are not medical at root. There is some evidence that suggests even in the US among white, employed, insured people, that bracket, that cohort, still performs less well on population health outcomes than similar cohorts in Europe. So there seems to be something just about being American and having this enormous kind of medical infrastructure available that is problematic. That's one way to think about social determinants of health, and it's we're all in it together and we all need to change our behavior. The other is call a spade a spade. This is really about kind of low income, traditionally marginalized communities, overwhelmingly of color. And they are the ones most affected by adverse housing, you know, unclean water, not great air, all sorts of things. And I have to say, I feel compelled by both those arguments, and I think it's kind of a political decision about which way you frame it. Do you think that it's required for political expediency to be framed as an everyman problem, or do you think it's more important to call a spade and say there are some communities that are disproportionately affected, and we just need to say they need our help more than anyone? I think children would be a great place to start, although I would say the education literature is not as robust as we thought it was going to be when we went and did that literature review. We thought, oh, education will come up huge in terms of the health returns of education investments. It didn't. There's some stuff, but it's not overwhelming. And I think part of that gets to a really key point about research and the extent to which we can expect there to be robust research on all these social services and the impacts of health. No one has ever thought about this before. We don't have an NIH that's funding gobs and gobs of research on social services. And so I'm always careful to say it's unfair to compare an investment in education and an investment in more MRI machines. There will always be more evidence available to us on MRIs than on education, even though we may think that education is a sound investment. So children would be one population. I think the elderly are another, or older Americans is another, especially around kind of social isolation and things we were talking about there. And then, of course, all sorts of communities of color. And it gets very dicey, I think, about how to link medical infrastructure or health systems with those communities, because there are long legacies of mistrust for good reason. And, you've got the formal contracting questions around how to link them, a community-based organization health system. Then there's all sorts of informal stuff there about how you can broker a relationship kind of on trust and equal division of resources and power. That is a whole other stream of research that I'm really interested in, but we don't have good answers on how to do that yet.
Thanks, Secretary. It's brilliant, Lauren. Can I have your slides, or did I get them from Stuart? So from the point of view of Massachusetts policy, I'd like, maybe you can't answer this, but where is the problem, a linkage problem, where there are resources, they're really here, but we don't sing together on one hand, and where, if you were the chairman, you were wondering where to put some extra money, you would say we don't have the resources and we have to build them. What do you think?
It's such a good question. We don't have a clear answer on it. My intuition is that in Boston they're here, and it's a linkage problem. In the rest of the state, it may really be an investment problem. That being said, we don't have data, and I wish we did, on what is the current capacity of our social service sector in any of these domains. How many beds are there available? How many homeless shelter spots are there? How many, there's no sense of the capacity. And so I think that's another place that we could do a much better job. And it raises this question of, I wish we would build a clear sense of collective consciousness about what we're really trying to do here, right? Because it's clear that we want to make the healthcare sector smaller. For some reason, I think for good reason, actually, we think we can do that in part by retargeting people to social services if their core needs are really social in nature. But does that mean we're driving down health sector capacity and we're going to drive up social service sector capacity, and we should be trying to use Medicaid dollars or anything else to build the capacity of that system? Or do we think it's going to be like a worse before better? There's going to be a lot of shift from healthcare to social service, but then we think overall we should be trying to drive down that capacity or that load too. And so I think this is a high level question for state policymakers to think about what is the relationship we intend for these two sectors. And the only way to know that would be to have some better data on what's there.
I'm wondering if that's an HPC agenda, potentially an asset map guided by what Lauren's telling us, where we would assess beyond just healthcare supply, what else is around and what's needed.
I would suggest that somebody take a look at what already exists. I actually would beg to differ that some of this data that you just cataloged is not. I would say it's not perhaps the most one-stop shop, but I would say actually on number of homeless beds, number on addiction beds, number of residential beds. I think that data actually does, and they're actually in the Office of Child Advocate has actually done a mapping of social services for children's services.
It would be great for you all to take kind of a leadership role in getting that out there, because I've heard actually 1,000 people recommend, we should make an asset map. We should make an asset map. And a lot of these maps unfortunately get created and then fall by the wayside without someone on the back end really kind of stewarding those maps in real time. So it would be great to see one map that had real authority and legitimacy to it.
We have time for about one more question, Mr. Chairman? Great. All right. Who would like to have the last question? Or we'll give you the last statement. How's that?
All right.
There you go.
Well,
And first of all, thank you so very, very much.
Again, thank you very much.
But we'll give you the last word here.
great. My last tidbit would be, I think there's already a lot of health and social service languages happening in the state under the guise of Prevention and Wellness Trust Fund, the heart hospital program, things that you yourselves have kind of funded and provided real leadership on. To the extent that we can learn from those programs faster, I think we could make much sounder decisions, particularly around Medicaid and Medicaid ACOs, because the experiences are here, they're already with us. We just need to surface those learnings a little bit faster. I know that's hard for government, but if I could have a last word, that would be it.
Thank you so much. We're going to take a 10-minute break. You were wonderful yesterday, and please be back in your seats in 10 minutes. Thank you.